no such thing as normal when you work in this industry. So yeah, I run Bevy, which is a New Zealand-based company, but we're a worldwide organisation representing. We're selling to the home brewer effectively throughout the world. We have the brands of the Graintfather, Mangrove Jacks, Still Spirits, and Mad Millie. But the Graintfather is our latest the thing we've pushed the hardest over the last few years, where we've tried to simplify grain brewing at home. Well, there's a lot of videos online to take you through the process, but it is a very straightforward process. It does help to have an understanding of what you're going to be doing, which you're going to be adding malted grain into the Graintfather, adding water and running it at certain temperatures to get certain reactions to take place, then rinsing the malt out of the grain afterwards, boiling it and adding hops. So in its essence, that's all you're doing, and that's all you really need to know that's going to take place. Yeah, it's very simple, but we've also tried to make sure that you're fully involved in the process, because we know the points. At the Graintfather, we're all brewers, and so we know the points that make people excited, and it's things like adding the grain in and smelling that malt smell when it starts coming through, adding the hops in and getting that beautiful hop burst of aromas that come out when it comes through, and then watching your beer going clear and boiling it and making sure it doesn't boil over. Those are all the things that make you really understand that you're a brewer, and we want people who use the Graintfather to walk away afterwards and totally understand that they made the beer. All we're doing is helping you make the beer, but you're making it. You do need something to heat up 16 odd litres of water for the sparge, and you need a fermenter. So people can do that with a big pot on a stove for heating the water up, and a plastic bucket is fine for a fermenter as long as it's clean and sterile, and you've got a place that can put it where the temperature's not going to be too high or too extreme. Yes, it does include the chiller, and it includes all the hoses so what's really important in the Graintfather is what we want to deliver to the customer is the best possible quality of wort that he can have to ferment, because once you've brewed your beer, once you've prepared the wort, which is the malt and the hops mixed together and boiled, that's sterile. And then we provide the chiller, which is part of the process, which is a counterflow chiller. Now you recirculate through that chiller boiling water to make sure that's sterile as well, and then it's a counterflow, so you then put that into your fermenter, run cold water in one end and hot water comes out the other end, and that runs counter to the wort coming through. So the wort that goes into your fermenter that you now add the yeast to is already at the temperature to ferment. So the faster you can get that down, the better protein you get. And secondly, if it goes into the fermenter at that point, it's sterile, and you add the yeast, and then the yeast will start consuming the oxygen first to multiply. And as it does that, it takes all the oxygen out of the wort, and secondly, it starts reducing the pH. So the sooner the yeast gets started and the less bacteria that can be in that environment, the best quality beer you can make. So it's vitally important to take it from a sterile environment through a sterile system into your fermenter and get that yeast starting as soon as possible. And that's what the Graintfather delivers. And that's what every brewer does. If you go to any commercial brewer, they don't put stuff in there to cool it down. They don't let it cool down for 12 hours. They cool it as quickly as possible through a heat exchanger, and that's what the counterflow chiller is. And all the hoses come to connect up to most different tap fittings. Well, let me tell you, in 1990, when I got back into brewing for my second time, and the Graintfather was my third time, that was back in 2014, but in 1990, I was brewing beer in that system, and it makes great beer. You can do everything. You need a few techniques, and you've got a lot of bits and pieces that you've got to deal with. But what the Graintfather does is it's all in one place. It's so simple. When you're sparging, you just lift up the bucket. When you're boiling, you set the boil. And the other thing about the Graintfather is that if you set the temperature, because When you're brewing, it's really vitally important to hit the right temperatures. If you are looking for 67 degrees Celsius and you hit 69, the enzymes will work differently. You'll get more unfermentable sugars that at the end of the day will end up in less alcohol and more body in the beer. Or if you hit too low, you'll get a thin beer and a higher alcohol beer. So it's important to hit the temperature that you desire. So if you're going for 67, the Graintfather will take you to 67 and hold you there, which is quite difficult to do in a system where you're on a pot on the stove or one of the other electric boilers that doesn't have the same conditions. You've got to stir a lot. You've got to make sure that everything's mixed up properly, because you don't want to. As soon as you hit 77, you'll kill all the enzymes. So if you're trying to heat a thing up on the stove or a gas and trying to raise the temperature, it's very difficult to raise that temperature without doing some damage to the enzymes. So with the Graintfather, if you set it at 67, or if you want to do a step mash, start at 64 and then go up to 67, the Graintfather will do that time and time again accurately. So the Connect allows you to connect to the app, and the app opens up a whole new world for you. I'm probably going to be shot by the NPD team, but we are going to deliver you Spanish on that app soon as well.
That's great.
Which is it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be a game changer, especially if you guys can help us with the translations.
Of course.
I mean, my Spanish is not so great yet, but the app opens you up to recipe development on the website, recipe sharing. We've got over 140,000 recipes on the community now. So the biggest problem we have now is categorizing those recipes, not getting them. It's how do we help our customers find them. So we're going to be expanding hugely the community aspect of the app, and whether you want to do it on desktop or you want to do it on the app itself. We're going to expand the community, and some of the stuff, I'm going to be really shocked by the NPD team when I keep talking about this, but some of the stuff we'll be offering peer-reviewed recipes, which will help you find out which is going to be a good recipe. So if Guido's got a recipe, for instance, and he makes an IPA or IPA, I think you call it here, and 10 of his friends like it, then it's going to get 10 likes, and it's going to be more likely to be promoted up on the IPA batch of recipes. You can follow a favourite brewer, and we want to have guest brewers where Thomas Weierman is going to come on and share his recipes and do podcasts and all sorts of things like that. Now, I'm really going outside of what I'm allowed to talk about. I hope no one can understand English. Yeah, it'll take you up to 4 or 5 hours. I think that's what we haven't covered before. So there's a period where you're preheating, and with the Connect you can set that to happen when you want it to be ready. So if you want to start brewing at say 7 o'clock in the morning, you can actually have it at strike temperature at 7 o'clock in the morning, which is quite a big advantage.
Yes.
I love that part myself. I start at 6, and if I'm already putting the grain in at 6, it cuts my process down to about 3 hours.
Of course.
I love that part. The rest of it just runs the process through. It'll tell you, as I said, the earlier stages. And it gives you a little beep when you have to add your hops. It will help you through the whole part of the process, especially if you've got the Connect. So you can use the app without connecting it to the Graintfather, but it's a whole lot easier if it's connected, because then it will actually drive the process for you. So if you're using the old Graintfather and you're using the app will tell you to raise the temperature now to 67, whereas the Connect will raise the temperature to 67 for you. It does change everything, and it connects you to the community, which is going to be of huge value to people. We don't have any pressure fermenters on the market yet. There are some around. We generally ferment through and then put it into a 20-litre keg and then gas it in the keg. The Graintfather is my third return to brewing as my hobby, and when I got back in the third time I said I'm never going to bottle again, so I got myself a kegerator, and that's been a life changer for me. Some of the videos that on the Graintfather side are in my house, and I've got a tap next to my Parisha, I think you call it, the barbecue. Yeah. I have a tap next to that, so I've got beer on tap. It's like movies, sport, hot big fire, beer on tap, and Parisha.
Your place in there.
Yeah, it's my happy place. Yes, you can do whatever you like. We've got people making sour beers where they're holding temperatures overnight, maybe for up to 12 hours. There's no limit to the possibilities you can do. It won't go above boil. You'll kill the enzymes hitting anything over 72, 73. Certainly 77, you're going to kill all the enzymes, so you wouldn't want to go behind that when you've still got the grain in there. Yeah, so it's a 2,000 watt element,
Okay.
and that runs, if you were going to run that boiling up right through to the boil, it would take about an hour and a half. So someone could calculate an hour and a half
Okay.
at 2,000 watts.
Okay.
And there's a little bit more than that because there's a pump running, but that's only a very small, 10 watts, I think. And then there's a certain amount of time that we're holding the brew at temperature. So
Okay.
that depends on the grain entirely. Well, it's really important to leave the husk intact.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really measure the distance, although with the new grain mill that we're going to be bringing out, that's a very defined amount. So for different grains, you'll be able to go back and get the exact setting again, which is another fantastic thing to hit the homebrew industry. But what's really important is that the grain husk is retained so that it can form the filter bed in the mash tun. Because we have a fairly deep mash bed, it's very important that you don't crush it down to porridge or to get rid of the husk altogether. You need the husk to create distance between the different blocks of flour,
Mm-hmm.
and so that we can get some circulation through the grain. So it's a matter of looking at it and making sure that each grain is crushed, is opened up to allow water into it, but not crushed so that there's no husk left. It's this year.
Okay.
You can hold me to that.
Okay.
It's a beautiful unit. It's
Electric as well?
electric, yeah, and it's cam driven,
Uh-huh.
cam adjusted. So both sides of the roller adjust at the same time, and there's numbers around the dial. So if you set it on 3 or 4, everyone in the world could set it on the same amount. So if you had, Viaman grain, then you could say that might be 3 and 4 might be Gladfield's malt in New Zealand, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been designed for IPA or IPA.
Mm-hmm.
The sweet spot is between 5 and 7%, I would say. We can go right up to 9, 10, 11% even if you want to reduce the volumes down.
Mm-hmm.
But the sweet spot's between 5 and 7%. 80% of the world's brews at the moment seem to be in the IPA category. But we can equally do some amazing lagers. We can do right across the range.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if I'm going to get someone to start, I would push them to make maybe a session IPA to start. Would be an ideal way to start. You've got a lesser grain bed, so there's less chance of anything going wrong, even if you don't crush it properly. So yeah, maybe a 4 or 5% session IPA or session IPA. We've developed the Graintfather so that you can use it in an apartment. So you need the space of the Graintfather and that much again for a fermenter, and you need a source of water to sparging water, which probably going to be on your stove. So the idea is that you run it in your kitchen, and then use the stove maybe as your hot water source, and then use it on the bench, and then run it onto the floor or pump it onto a fermenter on the floor next to it.
So 1 square meter, it's more
Should
than
be
enough.
plenty, yeah. What I do is after I've finished brewing, I clear all of the grains out, give it a good wash, run water through the system, and then I use the Graintfather cleaner, 2 tablespoons of that into I think about 10 litres of water. Now if the Graintfather cleaner is not available, there's the Star Sand, is it? So I set my chiller back up on top and run it through the whole thing and recirculate that back into the boiler, and I'll let that run for about an hour, and then I'll give it a good manual scrub out or rub out with a cloth to make sure that we get off as much of the tannins as we can off the stainless. We've got a little adapter that allows you to make to use 2 or 3 kilos of grain, so you can make from right down to about 10 litres, I'd say, maybe even less, right up to 25 litres, and that's across from 3 or 4% right up to 10%. Absolutely, it's perfect for that. We actually absolutely covered that off because that's becoming more and more of a popular way, especially if you're using flaked grains and things. Once you've set your program up on your laptop or on your desktop or your app, it'll just run through and it'll automatically change up into the next step. If you're doing it manually, then the app will tell you when to change it. Oh, absolutely. We've got an avid user up on the Sunshine Coast in Harvey Bay. About a year ago he'd done 120 brews in it, so that's the one Graintfather continuously. I don't know what he's up to now. He must be up to 200. It's been designed to last you a very, very long time. From mash out, if you're about 77 degrees, it'll probably take another 40 minutes to get up to the rolling boil. And once it gets up to the boil, you've just got to be careful you don't let it froth over, because of the proteins will come to the top and separate out the second. Then you'll get your rolling boil pretty quickly. Yes, it's you need to get a alembic dome and the alembic condenser, and then you start the mash without the hops. Make the malted mash, ferment that, put it back into the same Graintfather, and then distill off and take your fractions and blend those, and you're going to make a very fine whiskey. My son's actually got a video online on the Graintfather YouTube channel covering that, and we were just drinking his whiskey with, I don't know if I can use the band. We just had a music festival at our house, and we had the band in my wine cellar, which was drinking the whiskey off that, and it was superb. We had quite a whiskey tasting, and it was absolutely superb. In fact, the band was encouraging us to make it on the premises and to call it our house whiskey. I don't know if I'd change anything. I would have done it sooner. If I could have changed anything, I think we were slow to get it developed because we didn't really know that well about what we were doing in the early stages. I think I would have started on this project because we originally owned a business in America, and when we were involved in that business, we recognised that if we had the numbers, we could do something like this. Because it's always been my dream when I was brewing back in the 90s with all the pots and pans to do something like the Graintfather, and then we didn't really have the market, because when you're a small business, you've got to make thousands of these things to make it worthwhile, or tens of thousands. So we had that opportunity in 2008. We looked at this thing, and then we decided, it's only going to be 1650 watts in the States because of the 110 volts, and we kind of thought that we wouldn't get a proper boil, and so we didn't really pursue it. But if we'd known now what we knew then, we would have gone ahead with it, because it's been hugely successful in the States. We do get 6% boil off per hour, which is what a brewer wants. We make fantastic beer with it, and if we would have started it 6-7 years earlier, we'd be a whole lot more advanced. And if I had my way, I'd double the size of my team and bring out a whole lot of more cool products that we've got in the pipeline as fast as we can. It's a pleasure, and and thanks for providing this service that you do to the Argentinian and South American audiences. It's a fairly new continent for us to visit. I first came here in November and fallen in love with Buenos Aires. Yeah, I look forward to coming back and interacting more. I also say that the quality of the craft beer that we're seeing here is incredible, and the styles that are coming through are, although everyone in the world follows the American styles, you're actually putting your own flavours into it. We've just been into Brazil and seen the Catalina sours and Catarina sours and things, and the different things that are happening here. It's going to be really good to see how the craft brew industry adapts to South American influence, because you're so colourful and you're so flavoursome down in this part of the world. I'm looking forward to how things develop in the next 5 years.